Uh, and I'd like to use one word, which I know for Daniel is going to seem very trite at this point. This family really embodies and epitomizes the concept of Kandó, which in English is can do. They're an amazing collection of individuals who I think have some secret. Maybe it will be revealed tonight in the presentation that we'll be hearing from Eszter. But Eszter is really an unusual individual, not to speak of Daniel. But I will say a word about Daniel also. In terms of Eszter, she is able to describe in very precise detail how to renovate a home or how to rebuild windows in a house. As far as and I never really thanked her for doing this. The last visit to the United States by Dr. Otto von Habsburg, who was the last heir apparent to the Habsburg throne, Eszter learned of our efforts to organize. This was about 10 years ago. And just out of the blue, she called up and she said, I can organize for you a reception at the British ambassador to the United Nations at his residence. And lo and behold, I mean, out of the blue, she just did it. She just organized it. It was an amazing event that was attended, very well attended by other ambassadors to the UN, and really gave an imprimatur to the whole visit of Dr. Otto von Habsburg, which was highly successful in very large part because of that reception. So I want to thank you for doing that at that time. It was a tremendous, really good illustration of the can-do spirit. And then Daniel, who's going to continue. This is Daniel. He's trying to avoid the attention, but also has a remarkable history of being one of the first, I think perhaps the only U.S. advisor to the first freely elected governing coalition in Hungary. Am I misstating that?
I didn't see any others in there in Parliament. I think I was the only one.
He moved to Budapest at that time, and talk about a can-do spirit. I mean, I think you knew relatively little English, Hungarian at that time.
No, he spoke perfect.
He spoke perfect.
No, I spoke great kitchen Hungarian.
Okay, good. That was sufficient to get you.
And thanks to my uncle, I also knew how to curse in Hungarian.
Good. And you probably used that liberally during your very successful
with the conservatives, yes,
time in Hungary. And I, without any further ado, I'd like to ask Daniel to continue the introduction of his mother and this evening's presentation. So thank you, Daniel, and all of you for the presence here this evening. And I hand it over to you, Daniel.
Are you leaving already?
No, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to be gazing at you at this right here.
Sit over there. You can just move the chair over there.
I'm fine.
You know, most of us are Hungarians. Some are just, you know, by knowing me, they become Hungarians.
We got infected?
In fact, yes, it is a disease. But you know, Hungarians have had a pretty inspiring, many inspiring figures in history. In my case, they're also part of my family, and they're both inspiring and humbling. Tonight, you're going to hear about my grandfather who worked for the Minister of Interior in Hungary in the 30s and 40s. He spoke German as well, and because of that, you'll hear he was able to, not able to, but he has met Hitler and learned to despise him early on. However, after the communists came in, my grandfather lost his privilege, lost his position, carried coal on his back to support the family and to make a better future for future generations like mine. Telling his story tonight is an equally impressive woman. She escaped in '56, came to a country where she did not speak the language, knew few people. Despite that, she showed the same tenacity that my grandfather did. When she came to the U.S., she earned a MS in library science and a PhD in communications. I just want to get this right here. She became an executive at IBM. She was a member of the Invention Review Committee. She was a grant consultant for the New York State Library System and taught graduate courses in technical writing. She's an author, a lecturer, and many of you know, a ballroom dancer. But to me, she's my mother. She's a woman who conquered exceptional odds, has really worked hard and sacrificed for the next generation. Please welcome my mother, Eszter Odeschalci.
I love you.
Don't blame you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a presentation of my father's political biography, which is including the whole beginning of the 20th century, as well as going into I'm going to stop where the communists started, because otherwise you would be here until tomorrow morning. And in spite of the fact that he has told you that I got all this education in this country, every time I open my mouth, people ask me, honey, where did you step off the boat? So it's still the accent that is going to be all the way through this lecture, and I hope you understand it anyway. We are going to talk about a little bit, in order, especially for those of you who are just Hungarian by emotion and not by origin, all right? I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hungarian history and world history in general. And also, I would like to tell you very interesting stories about my father, who has been born in Hungary in 1908, when Hungary was still a large country, and we will go into that in a little while in detail. So this is a really living history. And my father lived through the First World War, the first communism in Hungary, the rise of and fall of Hitler, and the terrible years of the communist regime. His father, my grandfather, was Giovanni Melocco. I will tell you why I am Kandó. This is a Venetian family. The origin of what went back to 1175, and I have the whole entire history of the family, and it's very interesting because the new genealogical program tells you that Leone Melocco, who was born in 1175, is my 25th grandfather backwards. Also on his mother's side, he was Kandó, and also the Kandó is a family of many, many generations. The Meloccos, in other words, my father's family get into Hungary, is that at the end of the 19th century, they have established one of the first cement factories in Budapest, and there is a picture of that, and also a picture of Leonardo Melocco, my great-great-great-grandfather. So here is the cement factory. And I would like to show you here is, I left my pointer underneath of the table, but I can use my finger. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Hungary when my father was born. And today, I don't show a pointer. And today this is Hungary, here, this
Just
little
grab the
hole.
cane, use the cane.
Oh, how wonderful! See how resourceful he is. Terrific. All right. So we will talk about this a little bit later. After the First World War, Hungary was totally dismembered, and I will talk about this later. These countries were artificially created, and many generations of Hungarians got stuck in countries where they don't belong. So this is Hungary today. And just a little bit of interesting, Hungary has approximately 10 million people, and we was one of the first communist countries that joined the European Union in 2004. And Hungary also is a wonderful tourist destination, I must say. It's the 15th most popular tourist destinations of the world. Not only because Hungary is, of course, it's very beautiful. And we have these wonderful spas in Hungary all over the place. Because Hungary but we have a lot of UNESCO heritage sites. And also a very beautiful landscape, wonderful wine, and good food.
Spicy.
So this is, for example, in Budapest, where there are 88 spas, and the water is coming from underneath of the ground, 4,000 feet underground, and the water temperature raises between, in Fahrenheit, between 67 to 175 degrees. The water temperature of different wells that they are coming. This is, by the way, this is the Széchenyi bath that is the largest in Europe. So here are some of the World Heritage Sites in Hungary, and it's Budapest and all these wonderful places. And this is the Hungarian, I got into trouble with that. The other day I was presenting at Marist College, and I was telling about the Hungarian gulyás. The Hungarian gulyás is a man who watches the cattle, all right? Now I said cattle, and then they are cooking the gulyás in cattle. So finally I had to say, this is the cattle with the horn, and this is the cattle without the horn, because I'm unable to pronounce it. So here are some of the biospheres in Hungary, and those little dots show you, very interesting. But here are the pictures of them. You know what the Androhenic Lake means? That means that's the largest in Europe. It has, nothing is feeding it, and no river is going out of it, and yet it's there, and the water is fresh. So my father was born in 1908 in Fiume, and this was my grandfather, János Melocco, who has been the Chief Justice of the Court of Fiume. And this is where my father was born. At that time it was Fiume, right now it's Rijeka, and of course it's part of Croatia, and no longer Hungary. And this is where my father actually was born, and this is my grandmother wrote this. The windows that are marked, it's the Adria Palace where my father was born, and also his brother, János Melocco, who was executed by the communists. So this is interesting how Appa, I will refer to him as Appa because that's how he is known by the family. Appa is everybody's Appa in the family. And so Appa describes his first memory. My earliest recollection from this period is the sinking of the Titanic. The Carpathia that saved many of the passengers was very familiar to us in Fiume. This boat appeared in Fiume harbor every 2 months to pick up and transport the immigrants who were gathered in Fiume to the United States. We always watched this black ship with its huge smokestack as it stood at front of the immigration house. This is why the sinking of the Titanic and the rescue effort by the Carpathia was especially interesting for the inhabitants of Fiume. And then I looked up the Titanic, and that's a picture of it. And the huge smokestack that Appa is referring to, there it is, of the Carpathia. And then, of course, the Carpathia was sunk by during the First World War. Now, then Appa says, my political life started early. It must have been around 1915 or 1916, when one day we were taking our afternoon stroll in Fiume Punto Harbor with our German governess. Suddenly, a bunch of workers appeared from behind the storage houses carrying red flags and singing something in Italian. We were watching them. Our governess told us that these were bad people who want to cause a lot of trouble in the world. How right she was. Yet, at that time, they were not yet really communists, but rather social democrats. I assume that it must have been a May 1st demonstration. Now, I don't want to go into the details of why the First World War started, because I would assume that even the honorary Hungarians know that. Anyway, it had many causes, but the immediate cause of the war was, of course, the assassination of the Archduke and his wife by this Gavrilo Princip, who was a Serb nationalist. And you can see the pictures. Here is the one who killed, and these are the victims. And then, of course, the World War. No problem. All right. And of course, you all know that World War I was one of the most terrible wars among other things, and 70 million military personnel were mobilized, and 9 million combatants were killed. Now, during the time, during the summertime, my father and his family used to be vacationing in northern Italy. Italy's declaration of war on the monarchy found us vacationing in northern Italy, where my father still had some properties. I recall a house and a vineyard. During the summer, we spent 1 month here and 1 month in Ivancho, where my grandmother lived at the time. Upon receiving the news of Italy's declaration of the war, we were immediately trying to get home across the Gorzon. Trains were, however, no longer running. Finally, we have found a driver for good money who was willing to drive us over to the monarchy's side, and we crossed the Isozo Bridge on a horse-drawn carriage, and Appa was telling us that they had about 9 children there, his cousins, and the governesses and the mothers, and they had only 1 carriage, and so they were hanging all over the carriage like grapes. So next day, the bridge was blown up. And then, of course, you must know from history book that in the Isonzo area they had very big battles between the monarchy and the Italian army. And then Appa tells on what happened after they got back to Fiume. Italian warplanes were already bombarding Fiume, only 70 kilometers from the Isonzo front line. The Città di Ferrara was shut down by our forces right at front of our window. Because of the war, my father did not want us to stay in Fiume. So he rented a villa at Susak, Fiume's outskirt. It is Croatia now. And it was called the Maria Villa and belonged to an old maid, Riboli. Today it would be not appropriate to say old maid, right? It wouldn't be politically correct. And then he remarks that everyone we encountered there talked Hungarian. Then he says, the Croats were probably fighting somewhere on the Western Front. Then why was he, his father, here is the Città, here is the airship, the Città di Ferrara. And why was his father not enrolled in the war? There were two reasons my father was not drafted. He was considered indispensable from his position as Chief Justice, and he was over the age of military service, 42 years old. Because he was not drafted and remained with us, the war did not have great impact on my early life. At the same time, I did comprehend the great tragedy of the war because I kept overhearing family members bemoaning their fallen or injured relatives. During these times, my mother was preparing care packages for the servicemen and kept reading the daily news about the war under the guiding eyes of my great-grandmother. His great-grandmother lived to be 90 years old and died in 1917. So this is my grandmother, Maria Kandó. And unfortunately in 1917, my grandfather died suddenly in his office. So my grandmother, whose picture you can see there, moved to Budapest with her two sons. And then of course, you know that Hungary had a share of one communism and then another communism, right? How? So anyway, the Hungarian Communist Party was founded in 1918. And they were called the Reds. And Kun Béla became in power. Thank heaven it didn't last very long. But there were interesting things that my father said. For example, down in the village of Iváncsa, which is in Fehér megye, it's about southwest of Budapest, for those of you who are interested. It's not very far, it's about an hour drive from the city of Budapest, and the family had some property there. And my father said that there were not too many horrible things in the village during the first communism. However, at the village hall, the clerk said, quote, Your Highness, comrade, nagyságos asszony elvtárs. And those of you, of course, who did not live under communism, you don't appreciate this. You had to call everybody elvtárs, which means you share my thoughts and you share my opinion, and hell, nobody shared their opinion, but you had to call everybody elvtárs. So that's why it is so funny, because you know, this one thing is an honoring name from the good old days, and the other one is a communist expression. Now, I usually go into this, but I am not going to, because we have no time for that, what communism is all about. when I say this to usually the American college students or wherever I have a presentation, I give just an example of what communism was. My daughter-in-law asked my grandson, my grandson said to my daughter-in-law, "Mommy, my shoes are too small." So she said, "Okay, honey, tomorrow we go out and buy you a new one." When I said to my mother during communism that my shoes are too small, she said, "Curl up your toes because your brother didn't outgrow his shoes yet." You know, so this is a sort of an example of you know, besides being hungry and all that. So then, this is how my father describes the first communism. Most of the leaders of Béla Kun's government, Janó Lendl, Mátyás Rákosi, Ernő Gerő, Tibor Sámueli, were not innocent politicians but ruthless men without scruples. For example, Sámueli had 19 poor innocent peasant boys hung by his terror group on the square in Kalocsa in front of the Jesuit school. He accused them of not fulfilling their obligations to the state. Both undersecretaries of state, the Hollands, were also executed and their bodies were thrown into the river. The West referred to this period of Hungarian history as the Red Terror. After the formation of the Horthy government, these gangsters were called to justice and condemned. However, many of them escaped to Russia, including Béla Kun, Mátyás Rákosi, Ernő Gerő, and others. After 1945, all of these characters, except the ones whom Stalin executed meantime, such as Kun Béla, returned to Hungary. So during the first communism, the family had nothing to eat in Budapest. So they moved on to the village in Iváncsa, and this is the Kandó villa. Unfortunately, it is no more. So this is where my father and his family, here is his grandmother, and this is my father on the left and my uncle on the right. And it was an extended family that moved down to Iváncsa. And this is where he got very close to his uncle, who later on became the Minister of the Interior of Hungary. And so this was sort of the hiding place for the family at that time. Then my mother and my grandmother, my father's mother, decided that the boys have to go to a decent school, so they went to Kalocsa, and it was a Jesuit school. And they have spent 3 days there. Then he writes, during one of our vacations at home, my father noticed that my brother and I had no table manners whatsoever. We ate like pigs. I must inject that in Hungary you can sort of, table manners are very important, and by the way people eat you can sort of judge where they came from. So this is why it's important for you to understand this. Therefore, she decided to enroll us in the Cistercian Gymnasium, named after Saint Imre of Hungary, which was in Budapest. The Cistercians were the oldest Hungarian religious order, and the first monastery was in Cikador. They were excellent people and superb educators. In contrast to the Jesuits, at St. Imre, all our teachers were young and energetic. barely 10 years older than we were. Whereas the Jesuits taught us faith, the Cistercians taught us love and compassion as well as manners. And here is a picture of the Cistercian Gymnasium in Budapest. And we have seen at the beginning of the presentation how Hungary has been torn apart by the Treaty of Trianon in 1920 after the First World War. And when people say that, why don't you get over it? Well, you can't. When your country loses 2/3 of its property, you just can't. And when your compatriots, a lot of Hungarians are living in foreign countries and they are being persecuted, you just can't say, get over it. Anyway, that was my little comment. Even Sir Winston Churchill said the W is missing just so that, to make sure that you know that the W is missing. Ancient poets and theologians could not imagine such suffering which Trianon brought to the innocent. So, Hungary lost 72% of its territory, and it lost 8 of its biggest cities. More than 3.5 million ethnic Hungarians found themselves living in a different country all of a sudden. And we lost all the mines, we lost everything that was wealth. Then I have to say, of course, that my father married my beloved mother. And it's beautiful how he describes it. When I first saw those beautiful blue eyes, I knew I wanted them to look at me for the rest of my life. And thank heaven he did. But when he proposed, grandfather said, you get your diploma, no marriage until you don't get your diploma. So my father was studying very, very hard, and at the age of 23, after getting his doctorate, he married my mother. And then, of course, the Great Depression you hear about in the United States was all over the world at the time, and naturally, it was a very bad number of years in Hungary as well. So there was a conservative prime minister, and his name was Gyula Gömbös, and he has signed a trade agreement with Germany that drew Hungarian economy out of depression, but Hungary depended on Germany for the economic reasons, for materials and markets. When my father and his family were in Ivancsa, in that village, during the first communism, I mentioned that he got very close to his uncle, and his name was Kozma, Miklós Kozma. And Miklós Kozma taught a great deal of my father, and he trusted him. And of course my father was quite good looking. And well, of course all daughters think that their father is good looking, right?
Not all of them.
Not all of them. Shame on you. You are not a daughter.
No, his daughter.
I said, oh, your daughter doesn't think.
Not all of them. I'm just
Not
saying.
all. Okay. All right. Well.
But mine does.
Okay, good. So anyway, when he became the Minister of the Interior, my father was working already at the financial institution. But when he has whenever his uncle needed someone in the ministry, he always kept calling father. And of course, if the minister called you, your other job let you go because that was more important. So finally, this became a very usual occurrence. Sometimes my father didn't even go into his job. He went into the Interior Ministry right away to help his uncle. And then, what happened? This was sort of giving him a political opportunity, really. I was at the ministry for quite a while when another thing happened that greatly influenced my political career. Frick, the German Minister of the Interior, invited his Hungarian counterpart, Kozma, the uncle, and his entourage, including the secret police, health minister and others, for a visit to Germany. Dr. Béla Johann, Secretary of State, and Aladar Bor, head of the reserved class, reservált osztály, I didn't know how else to translate it, were selected for the visit. The delegation needed a staff assistant who spoke German fluently and who was discreet enough to know what he can or cannot say to the Nazis. The search began. Weeks passed by, and the day of the visit was drawing near, yet nobody was found with the required qualifications for the staff assistant's position. The delay annoyed Kozma, and one day he called me into his office. "It is a darn shame," he fumed, "that they cannot find a qualified person for the trip to help me. I am sick and tired of waiting. I want you to come with us to Berlin." Kozma was always remained a bit of military man and did not hesitate to make quick decisions. He went to Ludovica. Ludovica is a very elite, used to be in those days, a very elite military academy. Then he goes on, "I knew the rules of the office. However, from my finance exam days, I told Kozma that as a private employee, I could not accompany a government delegation. I don't care about the rules." His military reply was, "You take it up with Laci Oswald, head of the government employee department, and he will take care of it." So I went to Oswald's office, who immediately admitted it. "Ferko," he asked, "how many years of service did you have at the bank?" 6.5, I replied. "That's not enough to nominate you to deputy assistant to the minister, but with the recommendation of the minister, I can appoint you to ministerial document drafting, fogalmazó in Hungarian. And after 1 year of service, you can either stay at the Interior Ministry or leave." With that, the case was closed. So then the delegates assembled, and they left with a train where they attached a special compartment, a special car with conference room and all that kind of thing. And this is how he describes this. "I was in the first cabin by the entrance of the wagon. If anyone needed anything, they had to come to me. That night I decided not to take off my clothes because I figured that at the German border crossing we would be awakened anyway. I was mistaken. Our train rolled into German territory without any interruption, and we arrived at the Hof railroad station about 5 a.m. Hof is not very far from the border. A Nazi delegation awaited us, bringing with it a well-equipped bar. The Germans insisted that their Hungarian counterparts share a drink with them. They were quite disappointed when I informed them that His Honor, the minister, gave strict orders not to be disturbed until Berlin. So the Germans were stuck with me and kept drinking all the way to Berlin. I don't drink. So I sat there with the same full glass in my hand, toasting them all the way to Berlin. During the ride, I learned a lot about the SS and the SA uniforms and listened to incessant bragging about Nazi successes. Now, when they got to Berlin, it's interesting. The very first night, everybody was, of course, exhausted. My father didn't sleep all night, but he was a young man. And in the evening, they were invited to the opera. And his uncle said he's too tired to go. The Hungarian delegation was too tired to go. And my father was sitting in the Hungarian delegates' Bahoy.
Balcony.
Box, all by himself. It turned out to be that the opera performance was in honor of the Hungarian delegates. So at one point they were playing the Hungarian national anthem, and my father said it sounded like a German polka, and everybody was facing the box, and my father was standing there all by himself. So he described that. But then he goes on saying very interesting things. I am just highlighting a few of them. The Nazis went out of their way to cater to us. At one point, our hosts took us to the Museum of Art, where Cosma casually remarked that he liked a certain Bruegel painting. By that evening, an exact replica of the painting was delivered to the embassy for him. My father and the rest of the delegates were staying at a hotel, and every single one of them had what my father said, it was really a spy, but they called it bodyguard, you know. They couldn't step out to the street without these people always following and being there. By that evening, one day I remarked how I loved super large grapes, a real luxury in the middle of the winter. Of course, it was not America in the 80s. The next day, a large box of grapes was delivered to my room. Observing this pattern, Cosma jokingly remarked, "We should not comment on the beauty of the Brandenburg Gate because they will wrap it up for us the next day." They were waiting for Hitler because Hitler always said, "Oh, see you next day, see you next day," and he seemed to be always occupied. So the Nazis were entertaining the Hungarian delegates. During the Berlin tour, we saw and heard many interesting things. The Nazis talked about race purity and what they were doing about it. They searched out German types, I am one of them, blue-eyed, blonde, yeah, and compared them with other people. They even paid large sums of money to certain German types if they were willing to marry each other and have children. They offered general bonuses for each child the couple produced. The Nazis even played with the idea of the village ball, but it had not yet been put to practice at the time. And then you will love this one. While waiting for the arrival of Hitler, the host entertained us in a variety of ways. One day, around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, they took us to a secret Nazi hideout place. The entrance was through a grocery store. In the back of the store, there were storage rooms, I guess, but instead there was a pleasure palace. At first we were served dinner that consisted of whole lobster, salad and all the soft drinks. When the meal was over, the door flung open and a group of young ladies of the night walked into the room, like that. The prettiest immediately approached Kozma and sat in on his lap. A Nazi officer then distributed the other ladies among the rest of us. I don't know what happened afterwards because I excused myself with my official duties and left the place with my ever-present secret escort. And then finally they meet the Führer. On December the 22nd, after endless days of waiting, our meeting finally took place with Hitler. Now listen to this because this is almost hilarious. He did not make a great impression on me. He appeared to me a mediocre, primitive person who was convinced of his prophetic mission. He was a rather nervous little man, and he most certainly did not have bewitching eyes as the Nazis claimed. To me, he looked like the gardener of a noble family with his brown coat hanging on him in a clumsy manner, obviously not fitting him. We spent 1 hour and 15 minutes with him sitting around a round table. During the discussion, Hitler was forever harping on some problems regarding German minority schools in Hungary. Now, of course, the Interior Ministry wasn't the one in Hungary that knew the details about the education. It was the Education Department. So to clarify facts, my father writes, I had to leave the meeting at least 3 times to call the Hungarian Ministry of Cultural Affairs because he was in charge of the education. During our meeting, Hitler was neither friendly nor unfriendly. And before we departed, he pinned some decorations on our breasts. At that time, the Nazis had only one kind of decoration, the 1928 Olympic Order. It had 2 levels. Kozma received the first class, we received the second class. Of course, next day we finally left Berlin with the evening express without our Nazi escorts or drinks. I had a crate of lovely grapes accompanying me that the Nazis placed by my bedside just before because I mentioned how I liked them. And this is how our Berlin visit ended. I don't know whether you would be interested in the rest of the story. My father's book goes into, go all the way up to his arrival to United States and his life in the United States. And this was during communism. He had a terribly difficult life. He was carrying coal on his back. But the Nazis, of course, fired everybody too. Because whoever wasn't a Nazi lover, who was not with us, is against us. And you know, Hitler promised to transfer Slovakia to Hungary. You know that some of the land was returned to Hungary at that time during Hitler. You know, it was sort of, come on, I give you something, right? But in the meantime, the war was waging, and during that time, Hungary was making secret interludes, okay? And when the Nazis found that out, of course they marched into Hungary as well. And in 1944, Hungary was invaded by the Nazis, and a puppet Nazi government was installed under Ferenc Kandó as the leader of the country. Szálasi's terror was not only fatal for the Jews, but for every decent Hungarian person. His evil deeds were pleasing to the Germans and to some ever-present mobs who stole, robbed, and everything in the ensuing mess. During his terror, innocent people like Prince Miklós Odescalchi and others were summarily executed. Now, in 1944, I heard on the radio Hitler's declaration and his subsequent removal by the Germans. The Nazi takeover was complete. The day after the proclamation of the Lakatos government, I received an ultimatum in my office which contained a long list of employees. I was searching for my name, and I got to the bottom of the page where I noticed in parentheses, see the other side. So I turned the page. There was only one name on it, mine. About 15 minutes later, Béla Horváth, Undersecretary of State, called me in his office. When I entered, he looked up, and with a sad smile he told me, "Feri came, my dear Feri, we must say goodbye. The Nazis fired me." "We don't need to say goodbye," I responded. "The Nazis fired me too." "But your name is not on the list," he protested. "Not on the first page, but on the second." And of course, Horváth turned the page and said nothing. We silently hugged each other. The document read, "Because of his obvious anti-German and anti-Nazi behavior, I fire, effective immediately, Dr. Kandó Melocco Ferenc, Assistant Secretary to the Ministry of the Interior, and order him to house arrest. He cannot leave his home without the permission of the police." Just for you to understand why my father's name was Kandó Melocco Ferenc, that happened when during the 1930s, right after he married my mother, the Kandó family had no male descendants. So they have asked my father, would he adopt his mother's name and take up his Kandó Melocco Ferenc, keep his father's name as well as his mother's name. Well, we were, and with the understanding that his sons will be Kandós instead of Meloccos, because he had a brother who's my first cousins are still Meloccos. So this is why. And then why my father during the communism, and this is another illustration of the communism. You went into a communist office, they treated you like you were a dog, and they were rude. And everybody during communism had to have a red book. And the red book was actually an identification book. And the woman says to my father, "What is your name?" So my father says, "Kandó Melocco Ferenc." In Hungarian we say the last name first, and the Ferenc is Frank. So the woman says, "There are no names of nobility during communism." So my father said, "This is not a forename of the nobility, it is a double name." "You don't tell me that, I know better. You are Kandó." So the Melocco was skipped during communism, and in a way it was advantageous. Well, my father carried coal on his back because the communists also threw him out of his position. So in order for us not to starve, my father was bringing coal on his back for 10 whole years, so we wouldn't starve to that. But you know, the Hungarian motto, the communist motto, one of the communist mottos among many other things, that Rákos is our father and all this baloney, was that for a girl, an unmarried girl, for a married woman, it's good to have a baby. For an unmarried girl, it's divine. Alright? So knowing this, when people asked for my father's red book, and they saw that Kandó Ferenc, right? And what is your mother's name? Kandó Mária. They thought he was an illegitimate child of a lower class. Right? So this is another typical thing of what the communists have done. And of course, you know, Hitler's supremacy and racial motivation policies resulted in a systematic murder of 11 million people, including 6 million Jews and 5 million everybody else. And just a footnote, Stalin killed over 21 million people, plus. But during this time, there were many very courageous people who have been hiding Jews and everybody else who was persecuted. And among other things, my father was hiding some Jews as well. And you know, you could have been executed for that yourself. And my father knew Wallenberg. I'm sure that you know from history, the Swedish diplomat, because he appeared in my father's office very often in the Interior Ministry. And my father said he was a very nice gentleman. And then of course, when the Russians came in, they invited Wallenberg to a meeting, and nobody ever saw him after that, ever. Nobody knows what happened to him. And then of course, unfortunately, as well, this is a memorial of the inhuman Nazi behavior. And of course, in 1945, the Allied armies defeated the German army, as you know, and Budapest was totally destroyed. And then, of course, you know that Hitler and his girlfriend killed themselves. He should have killed himself many years before that. And this is what Budapest looked like in 1945. Well, this is only one picture. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what's today. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Only ask questions that I can intelligently answer. Any questions?
Any relationship to Kandó Kálmán, who was inventor of the electric engine?
I am so deaf that I was vacuuming my house for an hour before I noticed that it wasn't plugged in. All right?
Any relation to Kandó Kálmán?
Oh, Kandó Kálmán,
Inventor
yes.
of the electric
Kandó Kálmán is my great-grandfather's generation, my great-great-uncle. For those of you, Kandó Kálmán had 69 American patents, and he was the váltó áramú
alternating current.
the alternate current electric locomotive. He was the one who discovered that, if we can say that.
Invented.
Inventor, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I would like to, yeah,
Did your father's recollections appear in Hungarian?
it will, because I went to, my father was really a very courageous and very amazing person. And he has brought out of Hungary. They were, when the communists finally let them come out in 1967, then they were only allowed to bring one suitcase each. That's it, and they had to leave everything there. We didn't have anything too much anyway. But my father, instead of bringing silly things, he brought documents. And for example, I have several documents from I have Liszt Ferenc letters. I have letters from Deák Ferenc. I have about, these are very well-known Hungarian leaders. And so those of you who, so what I wanted to say is, now that I am getting so old, and I decided before I depart this life, I would like to make sure that these are preserved, because I have them in my house. So I went to the Hungarian archives in Budapest. I had several meetings with them. So I brought a bunch of these very, very valuable documents with me, and they are digitalizing everything. And I have to discuss it with my dear sons. Unfortunately, my other son is a slave of IBM, and currently he's at an IBM school somewhere.
He's not important anyway.
So before I depart this life, I have to ask them whether I should. I would like it to make sure that Hungary has these things. So probably I will ask them for the digital copies or copies of them, and then possibly, if that is okay with my inheritors.
Have it
Inheritors.
Yeah, lend it to a museum or back in Hungary. So
Oh,
it
well,
stays in the
that
family.
I can do that. There are three alternatives that they gave me. They said that they would even buy these because they are treasures in Hungary, and or I can loan it to them, or I can donate it to them.
Permanent loan.
You see, so permanent loan. And I have, for example, they saw my father's, because my father's book, this that I have put together, is actually from 3 different documents that he has written. And so that's, it was quite a bit of work to put it together. And these are his own words, and I translated them to the best of my ability. And also there is a mistake on page 14, and there is a correct on the thing there. Yeah, well, you know, when you take this part and put it there and put it there, and then you can, and you know how many people proofread it? And after it came out, I was the one who noticed it.
Always.
Yeah,
That's what
it's-
second editions are for.
Exactly, second, third.
No, the one that is on the internet right now is correct. It's corrected already. Because immediately when I noticed the mistake, I have now everybody is looking for the mistake. Yes, the errata, yeah. So yes.
Did your father keep a diary that this is based on, or is it recollections that he later
Well,
compiled?
this is he has been writing, I think, all his life these things down. So it was because there is a section in the book which he points out these are from recollection, because Horváth Béla's son, who is in this country, has asked my father to tell him what was really the Jewish situation in Hungary. Could he write it down? And in there, the whole letter is there, because the letter is several pages long. And in there, he points out that, Jurikám, I am just speaking now of recollection, because you know, I didn't bring this type of material with me, but the rest of the material he did. So that's why I ended up with all this wonderful historical stuff. You
It's
know?
a combination of the two.
Anything else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you written your own memoir?
Oh, yes, I have it. Misi, adjál egy olyat, ami ott van hátul.
Right.
Oh, this one. But this is not memoirs. This book is my escape, because I promised it to someone, and that's why I brought it. My escape is my story that I have written when I was a teenager, as soon as we got into Vienna, after I escaped, and it was terribly dramatic. And when I presented this at the college, there were 129 people at the presentation, because they were so interested in it. It's really, it's very exciting to read, and Clary, who put it into the computer, she said, it's like a ponyvaregény. You know, you can't put it down. But this is not recollection, this is real, and I know that my father only has said that part where he writes about this is recollection. So I know that he brought out a lot of the original material, so I can freely assume that that's not only recollection. Because this is interesting. The 8 of us were escaping together. It was very dramatic. Eight of us, and most of us were teenagers, and we had one 22-year-old, and we really respected him because he was so old. So he was the only one. So I called all these people. I knew that I had this written down with a pen in Vienna. And when I read it myself, I said, I can't believe this, how exciting it is, and how I have my recollection, I thought that happened that way. I thought it happened this way. So I called up a reunion of my escapee friends. Now we meet every year in Budapest. When I first gave it to him, they said, oh my God, I can't believe that. That's right, that's what happened. Oh, I forgot that. I thought it was this way. So that's when I realized how many mistakes there must be in history. When people didn't even write down, they just told each other. One generation from there. So this is when I was a teenager that I have written this one. Well, I just published it, the first publication was in 2006. And this is the sort of the second edition. Yeah. And you will see, here I am building a house, and I am up in the rafters. And he said I look like a monkey, and that's why he showed me the picture. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank
Yes?
you.
Very, very important before we finish. We're in America. How much are the books, and who do you write the check to?
The book, my father's book is 1995, and the little book is 14.95, so $15 and $20.
There you go, make it easy.
Check's okay?
Anything is okay, Mishi, and I have a book for you. I have dedicated a book.